Right, so in this video, we're going to have a look at sprites. So, sprites are basically just anything you're going to use in your game, pretty much. Even tile sets. So, tile sets are used in making sort of your level or your backgrounds or anything like that. Tiles are like little squares that you basically put on, and you can stack them, make them look like an object, etc. Even they use sprites. So, pretty much anything you're going to see on screen is going to use a sprite. Now, technically speaking, there is a function within this where you can actually just tell it to draw, and you draw it by coding, so you'd have to draw it manually. We could do that for all intents and purposes, but that is going to be way too complicated and way too long in order to make a game in the time we've got. So if you right click on sprites, I'll show you how to make a sprite. So right click on the folder sprites, go on to the create here, and then if we go down, you will see there should be a sprite there. So if you click that, it will then come up with this. So this is the sprite editor, as you can obviously already see. I'll zoom in so we can see a bit better. So by default, it will set it at 64 by 64 pixels. Now, if you want to change this, you just click on here, and we can change the size of it quite easily. So if we were to change the width and the height, which we can do, it's down here. So if I was to change it to say like 18, for example, it'll obviously change the height to 18 as well. Now, to stop that from happening, all we need to do is untick this box, and then we can make a custom size sprite. So we could make it, say, 32 by 18 if we really want to, which may look a bit strange, but we can do it that way if you really want to. It's entirely up to you guys. There are all sorts of other things as well, so we can resize the canvas if there's already something in it, so we don't delete it, that sort of thing. But just to make it easier, I'm just going to leave it on 64 by 64 just because we can, and then click apply. Now, obviously, you probably can't see it on the video very well, but there is a line that goes around, so like a box essentially. So I'm going to just keep it as this. Now, this little thing here, so this little sort of crosshair that's there, this is where if we're going to apply, say, a rotation to your sprite, or we're going to mirror it, it will mirror it around this little crosshair. So if we put this dead in the center, which should be 32 by 32, which I can also just edit here if I want to, just to make it easier, then that'll mean that anything that happens will go around this this center point. Essentially, the center point can be moved to wherever you want. Usually by default it's top left, and in some instances we'll need to keep it at the top left. But for this we'll just keep it in the middle. That's absolutely fine. So what we can now do is we can either import something, or we can just go straight into edit. I'm going to go straight into edit just to show you what this looks like. So this is the sprite editor. Again, it's sort of similar to Photoshop in a way. So there's layers down here. We can add new layers if we click this button at the bottom. So this is layer 1. I can draw onto it. Doesn't matter what I draw. I can create a new layer with a different color. Draw onto that as well. And the good thing is, because that's on separate layers, I can turn them on and off. And if I delete them as well, so if I go on the eraser tool and just turn the size up, which is just up here. Oops, that's a bit too big. Then it'll just delete what's on that layer. So I would highly suggest you use layers because they are very, very useful. But here are some of the tools that you can use for it. You can use text, and you can use shapes and do all sorts. Obviously, that's a bit big, but when you select a tool, all the options for the tool are up here. So like the size of it, so pixels, obviously it's in size of, so we'll set it to 1 pixel. And you can start drawing, look. Now, if I undo that and click on smooth, you'll see what that does. It'll just try and make it a little bit more smooth as you sort of draw in. So if I did that again, but without smoothing, you'll see it looks a lot more jagged. So it's just whatever your preference is, essentially. But this is the sprite editor. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to quickly make a sprite that I can just use. Doesn't matter what it's going to be. I'll just quickly make one. Get rid of that. And go back on here. So I'm actually just going to make a square, I think, just to make it easier. So a big orange square. And then we'll go on to black. We'll just give it a quick face. So nothing super exciting, just something super quick, super easy. So it doesn't have to be a work of art. I just made a little smiley face. Doesn't matter what. But once you're happy with your sprite, what you can do is click. So you got this little X at the top here. So if you click this little X, it'll take you back to the main workspace, and you'll have your sprite, and there it is. Now, if you notice as well, there is a play button at the bottom, and it'll look like it's absolutely going crazy at the bottom, but that's because it's trying to play an image that is only one frame. So we can animate this quite happily. So if we go back into edit image, we can do things like, so up here, you'll see that there's a little thing with frames like at the top. So if you click plus, we can add a new frame, and in this frame, we can get it to do something else. So what I might do is right click on here. Now what we can do instead is duplicate the frame. So we've got a second frame with the exact same thing on, and we can just change it ever so slightly. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to have it so he winks, say. That's quite easy, isn't it? So if I was to choose a color now, if you look on here, there is an eyedropper tool to get the same color that I had before, which I'm going to do. And then I'm just going to draw over this eye. Oops, if I could select the right layer, that'd help. Now, what I have done is done it all on one layer, which technically I shouldn't do, because that's not the best way of doing it. But I'm just doing it just for speed purposes. Oops. I'm going to draw this in so he winks, basically. There you go. So, in between them two frames, he winks. Now, if I press play, it's going to be extremely fast. Like he's speed winking. That's fine, doesn't matter. For this, it just shows you what it would be at, say, like, I think it's something like 60 odd frames. So if we close this and we go onto here, now at the top it says how many frames a second do you want to run this at. So if we make it, say, 3 frames a second, press play, you'll see it looks a lot better now, and it just does it every 3 frames. It just blinks and then goes back to the first frame. So quite easy. Now again, we've got it on loop. I could have it so it bounces back, so it goes up and down. It's the same thing because obviously there's only 2 frames, but this would be handy if you're wanting something to loop. So say it's got a walk cycle, then you want it to walk back, it will do that. Or you could just have it so it finishes. So it just plays once, and then that's it, done. So the other thing I'm also going to show you with a sprite as well. So this is just for making your own custom sprite. That's fairly easy. One thing I would also suggest as well, so naming convention. So I haven't actually named this, so I'm actually going to reopen it. Now, when you reopen these, you'll notice that at the top here, you can rename the sprite. So what I would always suggest is you put the first 3 letters of what it is. So that's, I'm going to call it SBR to make it easier. So we know it's a sprite, and SBR, we'll call it player. We'll say this is a player sprite or something. And then that should change in here as well. So it's just handy to have that because obviously you want to make sure that you know what things are sprites, what things are objects. When you're creating your code later on, you will type this out and it will suggest things to you. But if you've called everything player for, say, sprites, for paths, for animations, for objects, for rooms, then you won't know which one's which. So it's always good to have that at the beginning, just so you know for your code, basically. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to make a new sprite. So create new sprite. I'm going to call this SPR underscore. Let's put enemy. Why not? So in this one, so if you notice, it keeps the other one open as well. It won't ever shut unless you tell it to. And you can keep them open if you want, just to sort of see what they look like. I'm just going to close it because I don't really want it. Now what I'm going to do in here, I'm going to just click import first off, and I'm going to select a sprite sheet that I can use. So I have already got one called creature sheet, which I'm going to use. And it'll say importing files as undoable action. Are you sure? That's just in case you've got anything already in the sprite, but you guys won't have by default, so just click yes, that's fine. And there you go, I've got my little sprite that's in there. Now, if you notice, this is for obviously animation, which it's put it all in one sprite, which obviously is no good to us because we can't really use that. So if we click on edit image, we can actually sort this out. So we can convert these into 4 frames at the top here instead. And the good thing is GameMaker has already got this built in. So if you go to image at the top and go on to, it's called convert to frames. There we go. So it'll come up with this new menu where it wants to basically say, well, which ones are frames, which ones, or what size are each frame, and if they're offset by anything. So we know that there's 4 frames altogether to do. So that's what we're going to say. So 4 frames. 1, 2, 3, 4. Frames per row. So there is 4 frames per row, which we know that. Now, the frame width and the frame height. So obviously, we don't really know what the size of these are, or it should tell you when you actually download the sprite sheet. However, I do know that mine are, I believe, 16. Or it might be 20, actually. It might be lower than what I thought. 24 looks about right to me. Yeah, and 24. There we go. So, there we go. We've got 24 by 24 pixel images. That's absolutely fine. That's not a problem. It depends on what your thing is. You'll just have to make sure that they line up correctly. But as you can see, the white box around each one now. So we've said there's 4 frames per row, and we've said that there's 4 frames because it might be that each animation is less than that. So it might be that you've got, say, 3 frames on a row, but actually the number of frames is more than that potentially. So for this, it's just 4 and 4. And then we click convert, and it'll say this is it'll replace a sprite and make it into frames. If you sure you want to do that, just click yes. And now if you look, we've got different frames for it. Now if we press play, he's going to go really fast, but that's fine. Like we said before, we don't need to do it in this. We do it in the editor outside of this. So now we've got his frames. We can see what it looks like. So that's it running at 30 frames. That is a bit too fast. So let's slow it down, say 5, and see if that looks okay. So yeah, it does that. So I think that looks okay. What we could do instead, so we could have the bounce back instead, but I don't know if that looks any better. Probably not. I probably just want it on looping. I think looping looks better. And there we go. We can now use that as character sprite or as enemy sprite for this potentially. So that's sprites in a nutshell anyway. I would also always suggest that you leave this in the top corner unless you actually need to move it for anything in particular. So if you're using your player, I would probably suggest that you do put it in the middle. Same for probably your enemies as well. But we'll look at that when we come on to doing objects in a different video. Now, there are other things as well that I might go over in a different video. So things like collision, which if you click on collision there, you can see that it's already applied some collision to it. So that's the dark box that's gone around it. Obviously, you can change that to manual, and then you can change it yourself, so you can have a certain hitbox if you really want to. But we're not going to look too much into that in this video. I'm just quickly showing you that's what it is. And I'll also show you things like 9 slice and whatnot as well. So that is sprites. We're probably going to look at some other things as well. So obviously, sprites will be attached to objects and might also be attached to rooms. But that is how you make sprites and do some basic editing / basic animation in GameMaker.